Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jonathan Hunsley, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Welcome to the Connecting the Dots presentation, and thank you for joining me today. Today, I'm going to be introducing a variety of thinking approaches and some of the tools that are associated with these. Each of the thinking approaches has an extensive toolkit, and we're not going to unfortunately be able to cover all of the associated tools, but I'm hoping that I'll give you a snapshot of some of the available tools that can support you when you're using service design and lean thinking. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, but most of all, I hope that it helps you to think. And I think it follows on nicely from the Matthew Syed presentation that was given this morning, talking about the importance of diversity and inclusivity in our thinking. Please put your questions in the Q&A tab, and I'll look to answer these at the end. And please do also click on the conference evaluation form that's there on the tab as well. So a quick intro to myself. First of all, I'm a dad, and this is my son Bertie. This is us on holiday earlier in the year on the Isle of Skye, and you'll hear more about Bertie later on. I'm a director of Assist Knowledge Development, and I've also had the absolute honour of being involved in some industry publications that you may have seen. I'm also a part-time guest and sometimes host of the BA Brew podcast. If you haven't seen or heard this yet, please do check this out. So, the three thinking approaches that we're going to look at, they're thinking approaches that I've been looking at and learning about for around 6 to 7 years. And I can assure you that I'm still learning about each of these thinking approaches today. I expect to learn from your questions later even more about these thinking approaches. I really do hope that today's session spikes your curiosity so that you too can start looking at and learning about these thinking approaches and using their associated tools and techniques in your business analysis work. I believe that each of the three thinking approaches are complementary to business analysis and essential if we're to continue to gain the level of professional recognition that I think our discipline deserves and desires, particularly in the digital age. The other key focus of today is to look at how do these thinking approaches relate to the field of business analysis. We'll explore more on this later, but I firmly believe that BA professionals, we're all thinkers, we're all there to analyze and think about businesses. And so any approach that helps us to think about businesses, for me, should be of immense interest. So what I'm going to do is going to give you a quick introduction to each of the three thinking approaches, and then I'm going to dive into each of the thinking approaches in more detail. And the first of the thinking approaches we're going to look at is service thinking. The headlines on this one is that it's focused on the service offer from an organization, and it's a focus on who is the beneficiary, the audience of the offer, and looking to obtain feedback as to whether or not the beneficiaries perceive that value has or has not been delivered. It looks at the value proposition of an organization relative to its stakeholders, relative to its ecosystem, and is sometimes referred to as the study of value co-creation. And again, more on that a little bit later on. Design thinking, this is a different thinking approach. It comes with an extensive toolkit. It's focused on trying to understand assumptions, trying to understand the real problem or opportunity to be solved for. That uses divergent and convergent thinking, and it does that in order to explore possible options. It helps with innovation and helps to test and challenge assumptions in order to build pragmatic, practical solutions that work for the issues that we face in our organizations when we're applying design thinking. And the final thinking approach that we're going to cover today, and this is just the brief introduction to it, is lean thinking. And this is focused on the customer. This is focused on the customer. How can we ensure flow in terms of our delivery of items, products, services to the customer? There's a relentless focus on improvement of quality and also the reduction of waste, non-value add or value offering activities for and on behalf of that customer. So that's a quick introduction, and we're now going to look at these thinking approaches in more detail. And we're going to start with service thinking. This is known, as I said earlier, as the study of value co-creation. And it starts with the premise that an organization can only ever offer value. So let's imagine that I can magically give you a suitcase full of £50 notes, and I'm handing it across to you. Now, if I were using something called goods dominant logic, I could perceive that I've delivered you value. Service thinking says that's an absolute nonsense, and it says an organization can only offer value. It's the recipient that determines value. So let's imagine that suitcase full of £50 notes. You might feel that I'm trying to launder money through you. You might feel that I'm putting you at risk of being robbed. Or you might not want a suitcase full of £50 notes. It's a different way of thinking about things, but it helps us to start to think about, well, how might we obtain feedback as to whether or not we have or have not delivered value. And that feedback comes from those beneficiaries of the service. Service thinking is based on an academic discipline called service science, engineering, and management. It's interdisciplinary, and it looks at how service ecosystems interact with each other in order to co-create value. So if we looked at music ecosystem, we've got lots of different entities in that ecosystem: musicians, record labels, streaming services, technology providers, perhaps the provider of your phone, the headphone provider, for example, the power companies that we're using to charge up our phone. So it's all these different entities interacting with us and with each other in order to offer value for you, the recipient, the person that's listening to the music on your headphones. And this is the study of that ecosystem. So let's see how we can use this as a discipline. And we're going to start with how we might use it as a discipline to help us to understand and develop clarity on the role of the business analyst. And some of you would have come across the work of Deborah Poole, and this is the business analysis service framework. What this does is it defines the BA role through 6 services, and against each of those 6 services, there's a value proposal. And this helps us to define what it is that we offer, and also what is the value proposal of that offer. Really key for us to continue the proactive development of our profession in terms of proactive stakeholder management and proactive management of their expectations. And we're going to come back to the business analysis service framework a little bit later on. Right. A service, then, I think it's useful for us to at this point to define what do we mean by a service. Well, Maglio et al. Define it as the application of competencies for the benefit of another. And to bring this to life, I'm going to share some photographs. And this is my barber. This is my barber, Dan, who works at a barber shop called the Fade Lab. And this is Dan applying his competencies, as you can see, to cut my hair and to cut my son's hair. And we're going to use the barber shop as a little bit of a case study as we go through the presentation to explore these various thinking approaches. So we now understand what a service is. Well, let's look in a bit more detail as to what is an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is a community of interacting entities. And to help you to bring this concept to life, I thought I'd look at the entities that surround the barbershop that I've just shown you the photographs of. So you can see the entities are everyone from the customer to the utility providers to the booking application that's used, and the competitors, the landlord. But there's more. There's people like the local council, the local government, the insurance providers, the service provider behind the internet, music streaming services, all interacting in some form or another in order to offer the customer, the stakeholders of this service, some offer of value. And if the interactions work, then the customer might be happy with the interaction. And obviously, if there's a failure in the interactions, there can be problems. One of the things that I think is really useful to do, and I've seen a number of presentations today that have already referenced this as a technique, is to look at personas. And personas help us to start with the customer. So we're starting with the customer in mind, and it's the customer that determines value. So we should be looking at, well, what's the perspective of the customer? And service thinking, service science encourages us to do this. So here's a couple of personas, and this is a persona for myself, Dad. You can see that I'm time aware. I want to get a good haircut. I'm happy to pay a little bit more for good service. I can contrast that to my son, and he's looking to look good when he plays football. That's his passion, and he's looking to get a Dr. Pepper or an iron brew when he's at the barbershop, because one of the value offers from the barbershop. And there's a number of different value offers at the barbershop, and I'm just going to dive into that for a second, because one of the things that I thought I'd show you in planning for today's presentation is the value proposal that the barbershop has in terms of the fridge. And what this does, if we can connect this idea of value proposals to personas, you could imagine the personas that are behind perhaps the young family that are going to get their haircuts with the fruit shoots. Maybe there's someone that's health conscious and wants the sugar-free drink or to drink the water. Perhaps there's a local walk-in crowd. I drive to the barbershop, so I don't enjoy a beer when I do go to the barbers, but the local walk-in crowd, maybe they want to enjoy a beer. And you can see just by looking at something as simple as a fridge that there are a variety of value proposals on offer, and also different personas that are being thought of by the owner of the barbershop, Dan. There's something called the value proposition canvas, and this was developed by Osterwalder and Pina. And what this does is it helps us to look at, well, what is it the customer wants to gain? What is it that they are in pain for, or what are the things they're trying to avoid, and what jobs are they trying to complete? And what the tool does as a technique is it helps you to map, well, what's the value offer of the organization relative to the pains that the customer is experiencing or the gains that the customer is experiencing, and what's the offer in terms of the service offer. And so just taking this one a little bit further, if we take a look at the value map for the barbershop, you can see a variety of different things on there: the complimentary drinks, the high quality service, and parking for those that are driving to the barbershop like myself, the free quality Wi-Fi. If you look at what it is that I'm looking for, we're using the persona technique here, but we're using a lens. We're applying a customer profile, and you can see that I want to relax. I want to get a haircut. I don't like waiting. I've mentioned I'm time poor already, and the parking's an issue for me. But if we compare that to my son, well, he's more interested in making sure he can download the latest thing on YouTube or Netflix on his tablet. He definitely wants the Dr. Pepper or the iron brew, and he wants to look good when he's playing football. And this approach, service thinking, service science, and this approach, and I'm just showing a few different tools and techniques to help you to explore this this domain today. There's a vast swathe of different techniques that you can use to help yourself to put yourself in the shoes of the customer and understand where they're coming from and what it is they're looking for from the delivery of products and services. So that's my brief introduction to service thinking. And what I wanted to do next was talk to you about design thinking. Now, design thinking, again, as I said earlier, comes with quite an extensive toolkit, but let's start with a definition. And this definition has been provided by Tim Brown, who's executive chair of IDEO, and IDEO are a consultancy organization that work quite closely with Stanford University. Now, Tim Brown summarizes it, I think, really quite well. But he says that design thinking is human-centered. So start with the perspectives of our fellow humans. It's focused on innovation, and it's using our thinking approaches in order to assess and integrate the needs of people and the possibilities of technology. And when I was looking at this definition, I was looking at it just a few days ago, I was thinking, well, this definition could be a value proposal for us as a profession of business analysis. Don't we look at the needs of people? Don't we look at a range of tools and techniques to imagine the possibilities in terms of requirements and designs of potential solutions? And aren't we, as with design thinkers, focused on business success? So for me, design thinking is a really key thinking approach for us as business analysts. And what I wanted to do is briefly show you one of the available models that you can use as a design thinker. And this is the British Design Council's double diamond approach. What it does is it starts off with an issue. You've got to have an issue, a problem or an opportunity that needs looking at or needs some further work. And this upward angle of the first diamond, where you're looking in the discovery phase is all about gathering insights. It's all about trying to explore the widest possible range of ideas. This is where we're doing divergent thinking. We're casting a very wide net on all of the ideas as to what may or may not be the problem. And this is really quite challenging because we have to leave our egos at the room. This is one of the things that came up in the keynote talk this morning, because we're going to challenge and test each other's assumptions, and we're also going to see if we can be creative in order to think about our ideas, and challenge and test our ideas and our assumptions as robustly as possible. We then move into convergent thinking mode, and this is where we're heading towards a framing of the definition. We're trying to frame the scope of what is the problem that we're looking at, and we're trying to test and learn here. We can iterate, we can go back. It looks like a linear life cycle, but you can absolutely go back a phase if you need to, if you desire to, and if that's needed. And that's one of the key things about design thinking, is that it is iterative. So if we home in on the wrong problem, we're going to build the wrong solution. So we need to challenge and test each other so we can go back and make sure we are solving the right problems and opportunities for our organizations. From the problem scope, we've got what we might consider a design brief, and this was moving us across into development now. And we're again going to do divergent thinking, and through trial and error, we're going to try and see the widest possible range of possible solutions that we might want to develop to solve our given problem or opportunity. And at the top of the diamond, we move from divergent into convergent thinking. And what we're doing here is testing, we're prototyping, and we go back through the life cycle, back into development. We can go back into the problem space if we need to. But the idea is that we're using our thinking approaches, we're using the skills that we've got in our collaborative and diverse teams to build pragmatic solutions to the problems that we face in our respective organizations. The outcome, and all of the thinking approaches that we're covering today are outcome focused. The outcome is that we've got a solution that's been tested, we're confident that it's going to work in the real world. A persona, we're mentioning persona again, third time today. We can extend the persona further, and an empathy map you can use as a technique in a variety of different mechanisms. But what it essentially does is it focuses in on what is it that a person is saying, doing, feeling, and thinking at any given time. And I just thought I'd share a brief example of a completed persona for the barbershop again, the barbershop example that we were covering earlier. And one of the things that you can see that the barber can tell obviously what the customer is saying. It is possible to tell what it is that the customer is doing, and it's less easy to be able to tell what is it that the customer's thinking. And it's not as easy to be able to tell what it is that the customer's feeling. And this is where we've really got to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of another person to try and understand perspectives. And both the design and the service thinking approaches are really useful in order to allow us to do that, to support us in doing that. Another technique that I think is really useful in the design thinking toolkit, and there are lots, and I'd like to cover lots more, but we unfortunately don't have time today, and it's assumption reversal. And this is where you identify an assumption and you reverse it, and you see what the possibilities are around that. And this is part of our divergent thinking approach that I mentioned earlier in the double diamond. But to bring this to life, I thought I'd share an example. So this is the speaker in the corner of the barbershop. And the original assumption is that the barber selects the music that all of the customers in the barbershop listen to. Now, my barber, Dan, has reversed this assumption. And what he's done, whenever my son goes to the barbershop is he hands my son the phone that's used to control the playlist that's being used, and he lets my 9-year-old son select the music that's being played. Now, this is something that my son enjoys. He likes playing his favorite songs. Sometimes he'll put a bit of Kasabian on. He's put the Beatles on. He selected some Calvin Harris tracks last time he was in there, and they turn out really loud. And instead of just getting a haircut, my son's having an experience where he's practicing being a DJ of all things, which is maybe something you wouldn't relate to being part of a barber shop. But from what the barber's done there is he's thought through the perspective of a 9-year-old, what is it that I can do to extend this service offer? And by seeing that my son enjoys this experience, he can see the smile on his face. He's getting that feedback. So there's a little bit of a link there through to service thinking as well. So that's our quick introduction to design thinking. Our final thinking approach that we're going to cover is lean thinking. And I will be honest, lean thinking is one of my favorite thinking approaches. And I think it does come with an extensive toolkit that's very much complementary to the business analysis toolkit. To understand lean, I think it's important to know where it was that lean came from. And it comes from a company called Toyota, who are a forerunner company to the motor manufacturer that you know of today, Toyota. And the company Toyota were in the business of loom production. So think building carpets or rugs. And what they do is they build a culture where if a thread breaks in the rug, the culture is empowering the employees, and the employees stop the production line. And they stop the production line because they realize that it's not going to be a desirable outcome to produce a rug with a massive thread missing down the middle. It's a defective output that is waste. And so in the loom factory, the Toyota production system starts to be developed, but it's all around the culture of continuous improvement, quality, supporting your colleagues, your co-workers, to do their jobs and to take decisions and to challenge and question in order to improve. I mentioned Toyota Production Systems. Sometimes that's referred to as a thinking people system. And if one of the things that's a takeaway from today is that these thinking approaches are all about thinking and supporting a culture that supports thinking, I think is really key. Now, it was mentioned earlier on the keynote with Matthew Saeed, the concept of psychological safety. Now, lean doesn't use that language. What it does is it talks about respect for people. People have to be willing and able to share their ideas and their thoughts, and also willing and open to challenge each other. Continuous improvements embedded within a lean focused culture, as is challenge. Kaizen is a Japanese word that doesn't easily translate into English, but loosely translates into change for the best. And so it's continuous improvement and challenge for the best in alignment with the strategic goals and objectives of the organization. Now, service thinking talks about value co-creation, and lean talks more about teamwork and collaboration. But you can see the synergies between these thinking approaches, or I'm certainly hoping that you can. And then Gemba, again, a Japanese word, but this literally means go and see. So this is the senior leader, you, the business analyst, for example, going and seeing a process, going and seeing a service and experiencing it for yourself. A great way of us drawing out and exploring tacit knowledge. So that's the house of lean. And hopefully getting an idea as to what is this thing called lean thinking. It's been defined by Womack and Jones as being these thinking principles. So we have to specify value for whom, for what purpose. We have to identify the approach that we use in order to offer that value, and lean talks about identify the value stream. Service thinking talks about the ecosystem, and these are both ways that we can use to look at how our entities interacting in order to offer value to the end customer. Lean is also focused on flow and perfection and the customer pulling value from the organization. So you don't have stock waiting to be sold, for example. What it does is it's in the execution phase as well as the ideation phase. We're looking for continuous improvement. And one of the tools that I just wanted to briefly show you that supports the lean thinking mindset and approach is SIPOC. And SIPOC stands for supplier, input, process, output, and customer. And you can see various questions on the slide, such as what is it that the customer wants and need? Well, isn't that our focus as business analysts, to look at wants and needs? The POPIT model, people, organization, process, information, and technology, as direct links through to the process view of the world. And thinking back into inputs and who are the suppliers helps us to think about both that value chain and that service ecosystem. And I think this technique is potentially very valuable to you if you are dissecting and trying to understand processes, to think about those processes through this SIPOC lens. I think can be really quite useful for us as business analysts. Right. Then finally, in the lean thinking section, I just wanted to introduce you to this, and this is the SHEWHART DEMING life cycle for continuous improvement. There is a variant that says plan, do, check, act, but this one says plan, do, study, act, and this is looking at not just what we've done and checking to see if it met the results, but studying and testing our assumptions, testing our baseline kind of ideas as to what it was that we were trying to achieve and how we might achieve this. And really does, for me, bring to the fore the power of reflection, feedback, and continuous improvement. The most difficult part of this life cycle, though, is acting on the feedback, acting on the lessons, and it takes a large degree of discipline to do this. And I'm just going to finish this lean thinking section with a quote from one of my favorite authors and thinkers in this space, and his name is Deming. He's sometimes referred to as the godfather of lean, and he cajoles us and encourages us to improve constantly and forever the system of production and service. And for me, that's part of the goal of business analysis, for us to challenge how can we improve our organizations, how can we improve quality, how can we improve outcomes for our customers of our organizations. So let's try and connect the dots then, and this is quite a challenge. So we started with these three thinking approaches, and the question, well, how do these three thinking approaches relate to the discipline of business analysis? Well, design thinking, we've got an exploration of the problem space, divergent and convergent thinking, followed by the exploration of the solution space, again with the divergent and convergent thinking, to try and build solutions that work for the recipients of those solutions, to solve the problems, issues, opportunities at hand within our organizations. So a huge overlap with the design, between design thinking and the field and domain of business analysis. Service thinking is all about value co-creation for the customer and thinking about feedback and learning from the customer. And there's lots of different tools, but I showed you the value proposition canvas. We've got the value map and the customer profile, and thinking about different uses and ways of interacting with products and services. And then lean thinking, looking at process, looking at how we can improve quality and productivity, integral to how we should act and deliver our business analysis services. So how do they link? Well, business analysis is a discipline focused on continuous improvement of the business, and these three thinking approaches provide us with a way of thinking about, and also a toolkit that helps us to think about how can we improve our respective organizations. So I think there's a huge degree of overlap between these respective thinking approaches and the delivery and offer of our business analysis services. I also thought it'd be useful to map the services to the business analysis service framework that I showed you earlier, that's developed by Deborah Paul. And I was thinking about this particular visual earlier, and they're really foundational for me. They sit behind the scenes, but they influence all of the BA services. We need to think about what is our value offer as business analysts and how that relates to the value proposition, the value offer of our respective organizations. In the delivery of everything that we do, we've got to challenge each other. We've got to be open and challenge, question, assumptions, be prepared to reverse those assumptions where needed. And we need to relentlessly focus on continuous improvement, customer and quality. And if we're doing that, as you know, behind the scenes, it's in your head. As we're doing that, for me, I think that helps us to be more effective in the delivery of our business analysis services. Now, no presentation at conference, I don't think, is complete without a quote from Steve Jobs. And so I thought I'd almost end with a quote from him. He said that this has been one of his mantras, and he says that the focus and simplicity, you have to work hard. You've got to work hard to get your thinking clean, but once you get there, you can move mountains. And that's really apt, I think, for today's presentation and in the exploration of thinking approaches. But I'm not going to finish on a quote from Steve Jobs, because I thought it'd be worth getting a quote from Dan, the barber that I've talked about very highly in the presentation. And this is a picture of Dan. And I asked him yesterday, I went to get my haircut yesterday in preparation for today's presentation. I asked him, what would be the one thing you'd want me to share with the audience at this business analysis conference? And he said these words: you've got to think, look at what the competition is doing and do it better. Customer service is our competitive advantage. He then went on to say that most of his competitors in his particular field don't even think about it. And I wouldn't want to be working for an organization that didn't think about customer service, didn't think about listening and learning from their customers. And I think some wise words there from Dan indeed. If you like what you see and you want to find out more, please do connect in with me on LinkedIn. Please do start a conversation with me in the chat during the conference. Also, please do check out the BA Brew if that's of interest to you. So that's the end of my presentation. We've now got a few minutes for me to look at the questions, and so I'm just going to click on the question tab, and I can see quite a few questions come through. So I'm going to start with Mercedes. So most of the organizations use design thinking in new projects and long-term projects, startups. What kind of challenges have you faced when using it in day-to-day work? Well, a great question. So I work for Assist. I'm a director at Assist, and we use design thinking as part of how we do things. So we constantly challenge in a respectful way each other to test our ideas and our assumptions. One of the other things that we do is we test and prototype. So when we're, for example, developing a new product or a service, we'll test it and we'll learn from that in order to move things forward. Working for other organizations outside of Assist, though, one of the challenges that I faced in previous employers has been around the culture of continuous improvement and feedback being somewhat challenging if you're working with people in what Matthew Syed would describe as a fixed mindset. So people who perceive that they're experts and don't really want you to be challenged. And I think this puts the BA role and the asking of questions in quite a predicament, because we're able to think through permutations, test and challenge assumptions, but sometimes our stakeholders may or may not be willing in order to listen to those questions. So great question. Thank you, Mercedes. I hope I've gone some way into answering your question. And then Taz, from your experience, what organization do you think has embodied service design and lean thinking principles? That's a really tough question, Taz, and there's no perfect organization out there. I think that all organizations trying to improve and get better. I sometimes come across organizations that I think are pushing boundaries and really trying to look at and improve. And I'll cite an example of an organization that I think provides great design for its products. And there are lots of others. An organization that I'll cite is Sonos, and that they provide very high-end speakers that allow you to play music throughout your house. But they also provide streaming services. And they do this in an ecosystem with some other technology providers. And if you've been following the news, there's been some fallout between Sonos and Google. So things aren't perfect at Sonos. But whenever when I contact Sonos customer service, I get a great customer service. And I think they are leading the way in terms of innovation and design. I can't definitely say they're following lean thinking, but certainly the responsiveness and the level of quality that they show in the delivery of products and services would hint to me that maybe they've looked at it. My barbershop would be another example that I would cite as an example of an organization that I think the business owner there he naturally thinks about the customer, and he naturally thinks about how he can improve things. So for me, he's living some of these principles. And then Nicholas, you've asked, how do you balance lean thinking and iterating existing products with the demand to constantly develop new features and new products? So this is a fantastic question, Nicholas, and quite a challenging question as well. So I knew that I'd learned something today, so I'm learning something through your question. Getting the balance right is really tricky. You've got to keep the show on the road in terms of servicing existing products and services, but also you've got to think about, well, what's the next evolution? What are those outlier customer behaviors that you need to keep an eye on? And the balance that you have in your organization is going to be dependent upon the challenges in your organization, the growth ambitions, the mindset, the culture. And so there's not a one size fits all, that it's 50-50 between these or 80-20. But one of the things I will say is that if you don't look at innovation, you don't think about what are the emerging ideas, problems, solutions in your marketplace, that you're at risk of stagnation. And so a healthy balance that works for you and your portfolio. The other thing that your questions make me think about is legacy, Nicholas, and legacy in terms of legacy processes, products, information technology. We can spend a great deal of time servicing that legacy, but at some point, we've got to move on to, well, what's new? What is it the customer wants today? What are their priorities today? Not necessarily the products and services that you've delivered over the past, and you might have been successful doing that. But with the emergence of new players in the digital space, it's something that few organizations can afford to ignore. So they're the questions that I can see in the meeting chat. There's another question, I think, from Mercedes. Let me just check this. Phasing our solutions to MVP, I think that's minimal viable product. Phase 1 or 2 can be considered as lean thinking. So Mercedes, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by phase 1 or 2, but maybe you mean the problem space and then the solution space in design thinking. I'm not sure, but your minimal viable product, one of the things that I think is a challenge with that as a term is that there's the product language, and one of the things that I'm really quite passionate about is that we should think about services. So not just the product that you've got. When I think about Sonos, my example I shared earlier, it's the service prior, during, and after the use of the product or service. And it's not just them selling me a smart speaker, it's my continued engagement with them in order to enjoy a customer experience with them. They're there to support me post-sale of the product. They stream new services to me, and they release updates continually in order to refine the product. And it's a service mindset. But lean and agile, I think, are very closely related and very much complementary. And when we're thinking about minimal viable products, I think what we should be thinking about is how can we test and learn? How can we obtain feedback from that minimal viable product in order to learn around how we can improve that product? And what I see all too often is a desire to get the minimal viable product and it's then shipped. But unfortunately, I see all too often a lack of learning following the delivery of that product. And this is where these thinking approaches can really, for me, be quite powerful and impactful. So I think that's all of the questions, and I just want to say a huge thank you for you joining today. And I've really enjoyed the questions, and thank you for those of you that contributed. And would love to hear from you after today. Please do connect in with me on LinkedIn or connect in with me on the conference platform. And I hope that we continue the discussion. And I hope very much that today spiked your interest in these thinking approaches and their respective toolkits. So many thanks. Thank you.